Hey guys, welcome to Telling the Told and Untold. My name is Tshego. There aren't any content warnings for this case, so let's just go straight into it. On the 6th of December 2016, the entire Sabati family were home. They lived in Makau in the northwest. Constable Lucky Solomon was 41 years old and he was a police officer. He was stationed at Mooinooi Police Station and he was also a businessman. He owned a funeral parlor as well as a small supermarket in the village that they lived in. He was also a pastor at the 12 Apostles Church and he was loved by his community because not only was he this pillar of strength in their community, but he also uplifted them and he provided jobs for them, and he was just someone that a lot of people really looked to. His wife Matshepo was 40 years old and she was said to be a very loving mother who always wanted the best for her children. She had 3 children. The oldest was Tshego, and different sources say different things. Some say that she was 18, others say that she was 22, and at the time she was 8 months pregnant. Her youngest was Quinton, and again some sources say that he was 3, other sources say that he was 6 years old, but I do think that he was 6 years old just based on how he looked in his picture. Then we have the middle child, Onthatile, who was 15 years old at the time. She was described to be a very obedient, kind, and respectful child, but sometimes her behavior was very unfamiliar and different compared to that of her sisters. Both her parents were strict, but her mom was significantly more strict than her dad, and this was just because during this time Onthatile had started rebelling against her parents, and sometimes that happens when you're a teenager, but her parents really tried to be more strict on her and they started imposing different rules. They gave her a curfew because she had some bad influences around her. She had started experimenting with drugs, tick and meth in particular, and her parents just wanted the best for her and they tried to do what they thought would benefit her and just her livelihood. The Sabatis were said to be a very loving family, and people in the community looked up to them as the it family. It's what a lot of them really aspired to be. They were a church-going family. They ate all their meals together, and they were just the perfect family in that community. Just after 8 p.m. on the 6th of December 2016, Onthatile had just finished washing dishes and she was throwing the dishwater outside when 2 gunmen entered the Sebati household. Like he was sitting on the couch and they shot him several times, and this is when his wife came out to see what was going on and they shot her in the head. They also shot Quinton as well as Tshego, and all 4 of them lost their lives. Onthatile said that she heard what was going on, so she ran into the house, and this is when one of the gunmen shot her, and they just shot her in her leg and she fell to the floor and she pretended like she was dead until the 2 men left, and they left in the family's car, which was a Chrysler. This car was later found a few kilometers away from the Sabati home. Onthatile then ran to the neighbors and they called police. As soon as they arrived, she was immediately taken to the hospital and they discovered that her gunshot wound was just a flesh wound and she would survive. She was released within a couple of hours, and this is when she found out that her entire family did not make it. Molefe Tholo was Lucky's sister's child, so Lucky was his uncle. And Lucky was more than just an uncle to Molefe. He was a father figure, especially when Molefe lost his own father. Lucky had even bought him a house. So when he heard that there had been murders at the Sabati home, he broke down and he couldn't believe it. He made his way to the house, but once he had arrived, Onthatile was already on her way to the hospital, and the bodies of the four family members had already been removed from the house. Once Onthatile returned, he noticed that she seemed really cool and she was very calm, but in the moment they really didn't think much of it. They just thought that maybe she had been sedated to better cope with losing all of her family members. An investigation into the Sabati family murders immediately began, and police officers believed that their murders were related to a gang hit. And they thought this was because someone had something against Lucky and was retaliating. Not only was Lucky a police officer, a business owner, as well as a pastor, but he was also a money lender, so he would lend money to people in the community and they would return it to him in interest. So they thought that maybe someone wasn't able to pay him back, so they then decided to just take him out. Or they thought that because he was a police officer, he had probably made a lot of enemies, so someone wanted to get back at him, and instead of just killing him, they decided to kill his entire family. They also thought that maybe it was a robbery gone wrong, but as they went through all the theories, there was just one that really stood out to them, and that was that it was a gang hit. Even though police officers believed that it was a gang-related murder, they couldn't find any evidence against the perpetrators, and community members were terrified because this community wasn't a community that had any gun-related violence. So now that an entire family had been murdered, it left the community on edge. And they thought that if they could take out someone like Lucky, who was this prominent figure in the community, who was a police officer, who were they? The Sebati family were completely devastated and they wanted answers. They wanted to know what had happened to their family. However, they managed to find comfort in the fact that Onthatile had survived. 10 days after the murders, on the 16th of December, Lucky, Matebo, Tshego and Quentin were all laid to rest. And as people looked at Onthatile, they couldn't help but feel so sorry for her that she had to watch her entire family leave and she was just left alone. Onthatile went to live with her aunt for a few years and she also went to therapy. During this time, she also began drinking heavily and using drugs. She eventually moved home, but once she moved home, she stayed in the back room because one of her family members lived in the main house. And her family was very concerned for her, but they thought that her using all these drugs and drinking so much alcohol was just her way of coping with the loss. 2 years after the Sabati family murders, Karabo Mukhosi and Tebogo Chidi were arrested in 2018 for the family's murders. However, the state didn't have any evidence against them. They had no DNA, they didn't have any fingerprints, eyewitnesses, they had nothing. Despite this, the state really believed that they had a case and they just needed to prove it. They just needed to find something that would convict these two men for the Sabati family murders. Even though they had found fingerprints in the family's Chrysler and the fingerprints didn't match Karabo or Tebo. A man who had also been arrested for the murders turned state witness, and he told police officers that whilst he was in the cell with Karabo had told him about a failed transaction with Lucky and that he had to do something. Police also claimed that both men had confessed, but the men would later say that they were tortured and threatened by police to make this confession. During the witnesses' cross-examination, It was also revealed that Karabo had been booked out of the cells one night, and when he returned, he could barely walk because he had blisters under his feet. And these blisters were from cigarette burns from police. Karabo had also later complained that the police had robbed him of his shoes. Photos were also taken of Karabo and Tebogo that showed that they both had rings and bleeding wounds around their wrists that were caused by handcuffs. And this showed that pressure had been exerted on them before they had made their confessions. The information that was also in their confessions was proven to be knowledge that the entire community knew before the two of them had allegedly made their confessions. So what they told them wasn't anything new. It wasn't any new information. So because of all of this information that they knew that they had arrested the wrong men. So the two men were released, they got an apology, and were acquitted of the Sebati family murders. Things would go quiet for the next 3 years, and there was no new information until on the 16th of December 2021, when Onthatile Sebati walked into the Mooinooi Police Station. This was almost 5 years to the day of her family's funeral. And she told the police officer that she wanted to tell the truth and be free because she couldn't go on anymore. This is when she confessed to having had her entire family murdered. She was immediately arrested. She told police officers that she hadn't been the one to pull the trigger, however, she had been the one that had planned it. She then told the police officers that the two shooters were Tumelo and Kagiso Mokono, who at the time of the murders were 18 years old, so just 3 years older than Onthatile. She then showed the police where the two men lived. One lived in Makau in the same community that she lived in, and another in Shoshanguve, and she had still been in contact with both men. At first, it was believed that Tumelo and Kagiso were distant relatives of Onthatile's, but it turned out that Tumelo and Kagiso were actually cousins. So they were the two that had the family relations. Tumelo was the third-born child, and his family described him as someone who was very loving, friendly, considerate, and humble. He lived with his mother, stepfather, sister, younger brother, and niece, and he also had a girlfriend at the time. He was not married, and he did not have any children. Tumelo also had no prior convictions. He didn't really have any sort of relationship with his biological father. However, he did have a good relationship with his stepfather. He obtained at Rose Tech College a diploma in mechanical engineering and enrolled in N3 at Brilliant Minds College, but he didn't complete his studies due to lockdown. Just like his cousin Tumelo, Kagiso also had no prior convictions. He was unmarried and had no children. He did have 2 siblings as well as a girlfriend. His mother was a domestic worker who returned home only on weekends. So because of this, he was in charge of taking care of his younger sister as well as performing all of the household chores. He had completed his matric and was employed as an operator. When news broke that Onthatile had been arrested and confessed to having had her entire family murdered, her family was shocked. They couldn't believe it. But in the same breath, they thought that it made sense because when they look back at some of her behavior during the funeral and even afterwards, it made sense. It just screamed guilty. According to Tumelo, Onthatile had sent him a friend request on Facebook, and as soon as they started talking, Onthatile started complaining about her mother and kept telling him that she just wanted to go out and have freedom and enjoy herself. However, her mother was too strict. Tumelo claims that he told her that there was nothing that she could do about her strict parents and to just accept the situation at home. However, she just continued to say that she wanted her mother to die. In November 2016, so about a month before the Sebati family murders, Onthatile had messaged Tumelo, but this time she messaged him on WhatsApp, and she told him that she had crushed up some sleeping pills and put it in the family's food, hoping that they would eat it and she could basically just poison them. However, she says that her mother went to the pot and the pot smelled funny, so her mother decided to throw out the food. With all three of their confessions, the police were able to put together what happened on the 6th of December 2016. During the day, Tumelo and Kagiso arrived at the Sebati home and they met up with Onthatile. Onthatile had stolen her father's service firearm and given it to them. Later that night, they arrived at the house and Onthatile met them outside and led them inside. Lucky was busy counting money in the living room and he was shot several times. Tshego then heard the gunshots, and when she peeked into the living room, she was shot once. The mother heard the shots and went to peep through the door, and this is when she saw Onthatile and Kagiso in the living room. She then went back into the room and closed the door, and this is when Onthatile shouted that there was no one inside the house, they had left, and when her mother opened the door, that's when they shot her. Quentin was not supposed to die that night. She didn't want them to shoot Quentin. However, we're not too sure why they decided against this, but they ended up killing him too. Once they were done, Onthatile told the men to shoot her in the leg so that she could prove her innocence. After the murders, Onthatile received money from her inheritance, and how much she received in total is unknown. However, we can assume that she got a lot of money because she managed to send Tumelo 100,000 rand, and she told him to send Kagiso half of it, so they each got paid 50,000 rand for the murders. This was also proven by bank statements. Tumelo and Kagiso say that Onthatile had been the one to plan the murders. However, Onthatile says that all three of them planned it together. After her confession, Onthatile was taken to a psychiatric hospital for an evaluation and she was found fit to stand trial. All three of them were granted bail because they weren't seen as a danger to the community, but they did tell the judge that they didn't have money for bail and the most that they could put forward for their bails is 1,000 rand. However, the judge still set the bail to 10,000. Tumelo and Kagiso's family paid the bail and Onthatile's family did not. Her family seemed to be divided. Her mom's side of the family seemed willing to help, however, financially they couldn't, and it seemed like they wanted to forgive her or at least start that process of forgiveness. Her aunt was seen telling the media that they thought that Onthatile knew something about the murders. Maybe she knew the killers' names just based off of her behavior after the murders, but they thought that maybe she was being threatened and she was just afraid to talk. Her aunt said she didn't know what to do and that it's difficult because she lost her family, but Onthatile is also her family. Onthatile is her child and they don't know what to think. Maybe she was possessed. Her father's side of the family, however, has been less forgiving and they just wanted to see justice done. They would go to every single trial date and they wouldn't even try to speak to her. Onthatile, Kagiso and Tumelo all pled not guilty. Onthatile said that when she confessed, she was high on meth, so she couldn't remember anything that happened that day. Kagiso and Tumelo claimed that they had been threatened by police to confess and said that they weren't involved in the murders and they don't know anything about it. However, both of their fingerprints were found in the Chrysler. In the end, on the 22nd of October 2024, the cousins Tumelo Umphile and Kagiso Lawrence Mokono, who were both 25 at the time, were handed 4 life sentences each for 4 counts of murder, 15 years each for robbery with aggravating circumstances, 5 years each for theft, 5 years each for possession of a firearm, and an additional 5 years each for possession of ammunition. Onthatile Sebati, who was 23 years old, was sentenced to 25 years of direct imprisonment on each of the 4 counts of murder. 10 years for robbery with aggravating circumstances, 5 years for theft, 5 years for possession of a firearm, and an additional 5 years for possession of ammunition. Her sentence is in accordance with the Child Justice Act because she was just 15 years old when she planned her family's murder. And that's it for today's case. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out my channel a lot. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!